What should people avoid while traveling to Europe? Avoid any restaurant that tries to strong-arm you into entering. Had this happening in Amsterdam. Cozy little pizza restaurant with a million pictures on the walls from former customers. The restaurant was empty. Chef greeted us in the streets, invited us in. Since we were looking for a places to eat, it was convenient. Anyway, it was an awesome pizza with a very, very polite chef who was also the waiter. We also made a picture. If a place looks busy and nearby places look empty, avoid them. Seems simple, but seen multiple people go to the emptier looking place because it will be quicker. Flip side of this, explore a bit, especially at night. If you see a restaurant with all or mostly locals, go there. They are usually the best places for value to quality ratio. When I was in Portugal, I followed this and ended up in a real nice fish place. But I was getting death glares from all the locals. Up until my Portuguese friend joined me, he casually talked to a few, and in a blink of an eye everyone was lovely. Hell, even when I ordered a black label Johnny Walker whiskey, the owner upgraded it to blue and said it was free, then proceeded to chat with me for a while. Falling in canals and walking on bicycle paths if they come to the Netherlands. Another thing which primarily applies for Giethoorn, but also any place in general. Stay out of people's yards. For those who don't know, Giethoorn is a small village where instead of streets there are canals. It is quite the tourist attraction where they can rent boats to travel through the canals. However, some people fail to comprehend that it's still an actual village and people live in the houses. It has occurred on multiple instances that tourists walked into the gardens of residents to take pictures. Street scammers in Paris. Anywhere really, I just mostly see it in Paris. Had a girl in Athens hand me a flower. I told her right away I have no cash on me. I travel for work, I don't carry any cash. If I can't pay contactless, I go somewhere else. She stuck another one behind my ear and said it's a free gift because there is a festival today. Okay, cool, Jepk. She then started to gesturing a pregnant belly and asked for a little something for her baby. I told her again, as much as I would love to help her, I don't carry any cash. Her really sweet demeanor changed to a cold face. She took both flowers back and went away without another word. Pretty funny, to be honest. They got me with that in Rome. 12-hour flight that I couldn't sleep during, then a long walk to the hotel since I forgot I had already booked the bus. I was tired and not thinking straight. Fun fact, Rome has lots of hills and your suitcase doesn't like rolling on them and cobblestone. Get to the hotel too early to check in. Left the stuff there, got to finally wander, but now I'm in the heart of Rome with no reception, phone hadn't switched over yet and trying to get my bearings, and a guy comes up and puts a bracelet on my wrist. My wife is trying to be nice and talk, but I'm dead. So I start to walk away and she comes with me. His demeanor changed in an instant. Basically demanded money and I was so glazed I just stared at him. He eventually took it off my wrist and walked away. But Rome was lovely and I highly recommend it. Do not put your bag, purse, backpack on the back of your chair when you sit down to eat, especially outside. Thieves look for this in groups of 3 or 4. One of them will come from one side of you as a snatcher, and the rest will stand in a group very close to you taking or smoking, etc., pretending that they don't know the snatcher. Then the one guy will snatch your item and run right through the group. In case someone is quick enough to chase, they will accidentally be in your way. Happened in Rome, but locals recognized it and broke it up. To avoid letting the taxi know you don't know where you are or where you are going, the bad ones will drive you in circles and run the tab up. However, one thing that opened Germany up for me while stationed there was one interaction. I would ask in German, "Sprechen Sie English?" Do you speak English? Followed by "Mein Deutsch ist Skies," my German is. Everyone from women at the bar to elderly people would laugh hysterically and then immediately switch to English in good spirits. They just like to see you try, then they are more than happy to help you out. So my advice would be to learn a quick fire phrase that you can pop off to quickly to avoid the fumbling and starting the interaction on a bad foot. Don't assume that everything will be open during the hours you'd expect in your home country. This is true no matter where you're going. It varies by country and region, but in my experience, grocery stores, banks, post offices, etc. had much more restricted hours than they do in the US. In the US, it's rare for a grocery store to close before PM if it's not open 24 hours. In Europe, It's normal for grocery stores to close quite early and for things to be closed on weekends, though this varies by country. Also, mind your manners. In America, you can often skip over the formalities without being seen as rude. In Europe, this is much harder. Be more direct about what you want and more polite about requesting it. Part of what perpetuates the unfortunate rude American stereotype is that Americans tend to find European manners blunt and Europeans tend to find American manners invasive. Restaurants in touristy areas that have signs out front with pictures of the meals and the price featured prominently. If you do go to those cafes near touristy areas, here's a pro tip: take a picture of the menu when you order so you can check the prices later. And before you sit down, ask if they accept cards. If they say the card reader doesn't work, ask to see it or go find it yourself on their counter. Next, they'll tell you the Wi-Fi cell doesn't work, but on the reader you can see the signal. Then before you pay, check the costs against what you saw on the menu. They may be trying to push you to use the nearby ATM that has a skimmer on it. Another scam is when you order chips or fries, they'll bring you the large instead of the small that was priced. Make sure you get what you ordered and send back everything else. And water isn't free. In Mexico, my sister, her hubby, and me went to a little restaurant. My sister wanted a real Mexican restaurant and not a tourist trap. The prices were very reasonable. We had 2 beers each. We didn't ask for the price. The bill came and it was $25.0 food and $120.0 for 6 Coronas. We knew we were getting scammed, but they had a 300+ guy at the other table by the door. We said we will pay with Amex. This fat little thing walked up and tore down the sign and said, "Cash only." He paid and left. Never returned to Mexico. My sister's husband spoke fluent Spanish too. We got out of 2 dubious traffic stops because he spoke the language, but not the bar tab. Don't rent a car if you're going to stay at a major capital. It's not worth it. It's much better to use public transport and get an occasional Uber. As someone from Germany, I visited quite a few capitals in Europe, basically every single one in Western Europe. Lol, by the way, definitely worth it. I absolutely loved using public transport. Public transport is fantastic in most major capitals in Europe, although anytime I used public transport I only used underground lines and trams. That's like a dream for someone who loves anything with trains. There almost never was a need to use something like buses. I rented a car in Germany somewhere and parked in a garage. Big mistake. The garage was friggin' tiny, sharp 90-degree corners everywhere, no room to maneuver tiny spaces. Getting out of the garage, I had to go down one of those corkscrew ramps, and for the life of me, I just couldn't get in there because it was so tight. I must have done like 30 corrections, a few cm each, over many agonizing minutes. Traffic was backing up. Angry Germans were honking. Dozens of eyes critiquing my every move, silently judging me, each one thinking they could do it better. That was awful. I never drove in Europe again after that. Been like 15 to 20 years easily. Lol. Do not drive in Europe if you're not used to streets as big as what we'd consider a sidewalk in the US. I didn't realize how common this was until I read the comments and related to a similar experience. My family and I just landed in Rome around 10 o'clock a.m. and as we were trying to make sense of whether to take a taxi or the train, some guy starts telling us he's a taxi and can take us. He runs to his car, which is nowhere near the actual taxi line, and pulls up a meter on his phone. It was running super fast and he was taking the longest route in thick traffic. Luckily we had Google Maps open and redirected him, but still ended up shelling 3x the normal price. Fortunately, that was the only thing that happened to us. I really thought we were going to get mugged. Be respectful to memorial places. Don't come to the idea to make selfies or similar. Inform yourself about the traditions of the country. In some countries, you can openly make small talk with strangers, while in another one, you do have to approach them like a wild animal. I've told this one before on here. Me and my wife went to Scotland for our honeymoon. A few nights in Edinburgh, and then a few more in Inverness with a car. We went to Culloden because it was so close, and it was a really interesting memorial site. There was a lot more to the history there than I personally knew about. There was another group of Americans also there, and right at the memorial in the middle of the field, they all posed in front of it, and the photographer yelled out, "Everyone say Highlander." We had just been on a tour where the tour guide made sure to tell us that this is a solemn site and to please be respectful. I never felt secondhand shame more than that moment. Don't think that what goes for one country goes for all. There is all sorts of differences in cultures, laws, etc. You will also not benefit from rushing around in order to see it all. You're talking about 1,000 plus years of dozens of cultures. Don't speedrun. You'll get 1% of the experience. 10 places, rather than experiencing any actual nuance beyond the postcard level. And a personal one. Photograph low-level stuff, not high-level stuff. Everyone's seen pictures of the landmarks, but you having an interaction with a cute cat, you spilling ice cream while a local points at you, that stuff will be so much more powerful in terms of memories. Landmarks aren't Pokemon. Avoid speaking without exchanging greetings first in France at least, and not responding in kind when someone greets you. In other words, exchange bonjours before you ask where the toilet is. Avoid letting your kids act like monsters in public and restaurants in particular. Avoid rushing through meals unless your kids are acting like monsters. A friend of mine's family moved to Lisbon from Brazil little over a year ago. In conversation with him, who has been living here for much longer, they were commenting on how it can be difficult to communicate, even though they speak the same language as Portuguese people do. He was joking about the fact that Portuguese people expect specific formalities in conversations between strangers, and that we tend to become testy and uncooperative if we don't get the respect we assume is due to everyone. Immediately his niece went, "Oh, so there was nothing wrong with the lady at the hotel. She kept saying good morning to us over and over when we started talking to her, and indeed, this is something which the Portuguese will do. If you don't greet us and acknowledge us properly, we will keep repeating the greeting in an increasingly more aggressive manner until you understand you need to recognize you're not talking to Siri, you're talking to a human being. If you want something from us, be polite. We will treat you like royalty after, but you need to be polite. Also, say thank you and have a nice day when you leave." Basically, anywhere you go, just do a little research on how people normally greet each other, how to say "do you speak English" in the local dialect, especially in France, and if there are any taboos. For instance, my wife and I were in Croatia when the lockdown happened and ended up there for 15 months. Something we learned was Croats don't appreciate being smiled at by strangers. Why is this strange person laughing at me? Once you make acquaintances with Croatians, they are super cool people. I learned most of the local customs in Split from the gal I bought groceries from. Dober dan, Dona, Hvala. I feel a bit homesick writing this. According to 2 cab drivers, I am Croat now. There are lots of expat blogs that get into the nitty-gritty of this stuff for any tiny region you can imagine, and customs do vary by region. A lot. It goes a long way toward enjoying your time with the locals. Coming over with a bunch of cash and using an exchange service to buy. Just use your debit or credit card everywhere. If you need some cash, take it out of the ATM. Exchange rates will be much better. No commission, 3% fee from your bank, but that's reasonable. Oh, but always select the local currency when doing that. Let your bank do the conversion. Many ATMs have Thai conversion fees, at least in Poland. I once did the math, and based on the ATM's conversion rate, their commission was 1,400 ZL based on 1,000 ZL, or $312 to withdraw $226. And that's not including in fee your bank may have. Also, Charles Schwab debit cards return the international commission fees and have no extra fee. Just to suggest that bank, as it's been a lifesaver for me. It really depends on which part of Europe you are talking about. For example, Finland and Italy are very different places with different social cultures. Heck, there are differences even inside a country. Some tips in Finland, capital area especially, never sit right next to a stranger unless the bus is super cramped or something. Otherwise, you'll be regarded as a creep. Also, don't walk or stand too close to people if there is space. Finnish bus stops are actually a bit funny with how people spread horizontally as far away as possible while still being at the proximity of the bus stop. Don't speak loudly in public spaces, only if you really have to. Otherwise, again, you're a creep. This is more a city thing. Don't interrupt other people, unless, again, you have to, or the other person is really rambling on and you have limited time to speak. This is actually a significant difference between Finns and aforementioned Italians. Interrupting or more like elbowing in conversations in Italy is normal traffic rule and implies active engagement and listening, assuming that both parties are elbowing, while interrupting in Finland implies that you aren't valuing what the other person is telling. Source: I'm a Finn that worked a bit with Italians. I kinda needed to learn new traffic rules with them. It went fine after that. Don't take schedules lightly. A Finn says PM. They mean PM sharp. As an American who did this foolishly, American chain restaurants. You flew 5,000 miles across an ocean. Don't waste your time eating American food you could have gotten in Ohio. Don't just try the local stuff. Go out of your way to find small mom and pop restaurants that the actual residents prefer. The best meal of my entire life was in such a restaurant in Greece. I had rented a car with a friend who was visiting his grandparents, and we were driving up north from Athens for hours. I kept trying to stop on the highway for some American or similar fast food. Pita Pan is legit decent fast food. We had pulled off onto a smaller road and for hours didn't see anything. We were so hungry we promised to pull over at the next restaurant we saw. When we finally saw one, we pulled over immediately, only to find ourselves in someone's house. It literally looked like someone's driveway. Eventually, I noticed a little Coke-branded refrigerator filled with beers and realized it really was a restaurant, kind of. Inside was literally some grandma's house, but the living room was full of small wooden tables, probably 4-5. We were the only ones in the entire place besides Grandpa, who was reading a newspaper and having a coffee. You could see into the rest of the house, which was literally just some old people's home. Grandma excitedly welcomed us and asked us what we wanted to drink. The food was whatever she cooked. That day, you didn't have a choice. That day it was some kind of meat, either beef or beef, goat in red meat sauce with potatoes and some Greek salad and hearty bread. I guess if you didn't like what she was serving, you were out of luck, but it was utterly divine. Best thing I've ever had. It was also like $7 for the whole thing. I figure she literally just cooks for herself and her husband and makes 2-3x as much on the chance that a few people stop by. I wish I had some idea where that place was, but I'd never find it in 100 years of traveling again. Avoid assuming Europe is all roughly the same. It's a continent, not a country. You don't go to Japan and expect it to be like Indonesia just because they are both in Asia. In other words, it all depends on which country in Europe you are traveling to. I tell this to Europeans about America all the time. We closer to a congratulation of courts than one relatively united culture. A girl I was close friends with came over from Europe and we did a road trip around the US for 2 months. She was just absolutely shocked at how different the people and cultures were. I intentionally did a zigzag across the country from Boston to La. I'm like, Germany is closer to you in Spain than most of the Us's to each other, and the culture could be more different, yet you think that doesn't apply here. I would recommend avoiding let any tourist group plan your trip. You will only see the most touristy stuff and everything you eat will be insanely expensive. If you research enough, you can do well in Europe and eat for much less. I somewhat disagree on this one. From USA, where most people might get one international trip in their life if they are lucky, being able to see the monuments in person through a group is a great way for them to experience such sights. A lot of people are just bad at planning as well, amongst 100 other reasons why a group travel would make sense. I'm blessed to have been multiple times, but I would always encourage someone to make the trip, even if it's through a group. Euronet ATMs, as they are basically a scam and will charge you up to 20 in fees for the money you are withdrawing. If you're American, get a Charles Schwab checking account. 100% free to sign up and use. Amazing customer service. Their debit card refunds all ATM fees anywhere in the world. I've saved at least $500 in ATM fees over the last few years. I travel a lot. I've had an ATM machine eat my card twice and had it stolen once. Every time I had a new debit card within 3 days, even if I was in a small town in Hungary or Indonesia. Avoid trying to visit too many cities and countries during the same trip and stay everywhere for a minimum of 2 nights. Us tourists seem to want to see too many places for short visits and end up not really experiencing anywhere properly. I generally agree with you, but I also think it really depends on the city in question. For most major cities you need 2-3 nights to see everything, or at least the major stuff, but there are also plenty of lesser cities, which are definitely worth checking out, where one night is fully sufficient to see everything you would want to see. I'd avoid social media and watching TV in the month before your trip and spend that time on Duolingo instead. Not sure where exactly you're going in Europe, but it'll help you to know a couple of phrases in the language. I took a few years of a foreign language and was to the point where I could understand conversations and reply, more or less. I lost it since I haven't used it, but I found that Duolingo was absolutely terrible for catching up and keeping the language in my mind. Even when stating my level of comprehension, it didn't teach common phrases, grammar, or anything remotely useful IMO. If I ever decide to start back on learning a language, I'll probably read through my textbook and start watching Netflix dubs. I'd recommend Pimsleur over Duolingo. Duolingo is designed to be a long-term course that teaches you to read, write, and listen over several months or even years. Pimsleur is a compact one-month course that just teaches the speaking and listening required for tourism. All the important signs will be in English, so you won't really need to read and write. For those that aren't, you can use a Translate app with a camera mode. But being able to rapidly learn speaking S's and pronounce things properly in a native accent, which Duolingo doesn't teach, is massively useful. I was pickpocketed in Pisa. I even had the purse with the metal cable in the strap and little fasteners on the ends of the zippers to keep them closed. I spent 2 weeks faithfully fastening those fasteners, but for some reason I didn't after I'd reached into my purse. Walking from the train station to the Leaning Tower, I suddenly realized my purse was open and my wallet was gone. 4 of us, and no one noticed it happen. Luckily, most of my money and passport were in a money belt under my clothes, but he still got 20-30 euros and my credit card. We figured pickpocketers are looking for cash, not to steal identities, so we retraced our steps and found my wallet in a trash can. Cash gone, of course, but the credit card was still in it. I was so relieved. Realized after thinking about it, it probably happened as we walked by some street vendors. They distracted us by calling out for us to buy something. Although we just said no thank you and kept walking, it was probably enough distraction for their accomplice to pickpocket me. American living in Spain here, but have been to a few other countries. If you're American, Canadian, most folks will notice whether you want them to or not, but try to remember to use less volume when speaking. Learn the tipping culture before you travel to the country. Same goes for how they bring the bill. In many countries you need to ask for it, as they expect you to enjoy your meal and hang out as long as you want, and won't interrupt by bringing the bill. Keep valuables hidden away. Don't hang a purse on the back of your chair when you eat, or leave it open when you are on the train, etc. But most importantly, remember that things will be different, and embrace those differences. They likely won't have ranch dressing, and might bring you olive oil and vinegar with your salad. Or if you order a coffee, it might be an espresso or other tiny beverage. Don't get angry about it. Enjoy that it's different than what you get at home, and adapt. I've found that smiling at everyone as I walk around kind of freaks them out, but there's only so much I can change. Try to learn a few words, phrases in the language of the country you are visiting, especially for France. It can change the entire interaction if you show them you respect their culture, language. There's 1,000 things you can consider, but those are what I've learned are the easiest, most important. Oh, also, depending on the country, a hamburger is just the patty, so don't get mad when there's no bun.